Hi everybody, it's Jen. Welcome back to my channel, Hallmark Plus More, where we watch and talk about shows, movies, mysteries, Hallmark ornaments, and anything else that floats our boat. So today I'm going to be reviewing NCIS Origins, Season 1, Episode 9. It airs on CBS, starring Austin Stowell as a young Leroy Jethro Gibbs. So before I review the episode, I just want to say thank you to everybody who subscribes and watches my videos. I appreciate you so much. So thank you. Really, I appreciate it. So the episode starts out with a flashback of Gibbs. It says from 6 months ago. You can see he's a little frustrated because he kind of has his board and paperwork, still trying to locate Pedro, who killed his wife and daughter. And I love that it's narrated by Mark Harmon because it's such a familiar voice, right? We love Gibbs. It's been on for 22 seasons. We're really familiar with his voice. So it's always comforting to me when you see a scene where somebody's frustrated and then you hear that comforting voice of Gibbs. And he basically says, I stopped eating. You know what I mean? You could see that he was drinking. He kind of got angry. He's a little frustrated. And then it cuts out to 6 months later. So you kind of just see his frustration not being able to locate Pedro, but still having out all the paperwork and still kind of having a minimal apartment, not back in his house, still in this minimal apartment, not any furniture. He's just sitting at a table, depressed basically that he can't locate him. And then all of a sudden it's like present day, 6 months later. And they bring in a drunken sailor, right? The guy's like, look, he threw up on my car 3 times. Can you just put him in holding, let him, sober up? So you don't think anything of it, but I'm like, there's something going on with him, right? So they go to book him. He drove off the road too. I guess he was driving and he was drunk. So they're like, look, we have to book him. And they find a woman's ID in his belongings, in his wallet. Dana Rogers. So now they're like, great, he's drunk, he doesn't remember anything, and he's spouting something out. She went in pot of grease. I told her no. So you're like, what is pot of grease? And you see the scratches on his arms and you're like, okay, what happened? So it turns out he was so intoxicated. He wasn't saying pot of grease. He was saying the name of the club that they were in Tijuana, Mexico. So, you kind of get those clues going back together. And then once he sobers up, you find out, Randy's in there to question him, what are the scratches? What did you do with her? And he's like, look, we were celebrating. She had a career move. They were celebrating. They were going to go to a club. They found somebody named Amelia, and she basically says, I got this, the best club to go to. So they went to a club with her. They had one drink. They started dancing. And then he says he remembers 2 guys pulling her away. And she was scratching him to stop, yell out his name, Nate, help, help. And he was so out of it, he couldn't really help her. She was, trying to get him, stop the 2 men from taking her basically. And he felt bad because he was like, I was out of it. I watched these guys take her and there was nothing that I could do. And you find out later he wasn't just drunk, he was drugged. So the drug was to make him sleep. So that's kind of why he felt helpless when they were taking her. So the first thing I think of is 2 men taking her. He was drugged, which means they wanted to make it easy. She was the target. They just wanted to, not let him put up a fight, so they drugged him. So it seems more professional to me, they know what they're doing. So obviously my first thought is sex ring, right? Trafficking. Why are they taking her, right? And, he said this Amelia, they took some pictures of her with the disposable camera. So then you're thinking, okay, now they're going to find the camera. And they do. They find the camera in his car. And they develop the photos, so now they have a picture, right? And they're like, well, she must be a scout because this seems like she's into some kind of human trafficking, sex ring, something going on. So they want to find the girl that kind of lured them to the club, so to speak, and kind of see what's going on. So, I mean, at least he gave them a lot of information, and they figured out what the club was, because Layla had she told Gibbs that she had been going to Mexico once a month to visit her dad. And really, she did confess to Gibbs, like, no, I come here once a month to look for Pedro. So, I mean, Layla didn't know Gibbs, but it's very personal to her because it happened on NCIS's watch, right? Or NIS's watch. Because we learned from the previous episode, Randy was supposed to be on the detail, and he pulled off because of his young son having colic, and Mitchell was put on the case, Agent Mitchell. And of course, he dies because we know the agent was shot in the head, and then Kelly and Shannon were killed. So, I mean, it is personal to everybody at NIS because, Layla was saying, I wasn't on the detail, but I feel responsible. It was our agency, it was our responsibility. So that's kind of interesting because, like I say, you notice when Gibbs joins the team, everybody's a little hesitant, right? When they were teasing about the psych eval and everything. And it seems like as these episodes go on, I mean, we are on episode 9. So far, we saw the connection with Randy. He was supposed to be on the protection detail, and he, told him he wasn't alert enough, which we discussed previously. If you've seen my other videos, if you have children, grandchildren, they have colic, you aren't alert if you've had sleepless nights. So I think Randy did the professional, the right thing by saying, hey, I don't feel competent enough and alert enough since I've been up for the last 3 nights with my son to take on a protection detail. So we know that was Randy's connection. Now we find out it was personal to Layla because she feels like it was her agency, working for NIS, and she's been taking it personally. She even told Gibbs, if we find Pedro, we're going to take him out. Like, I personally am going to make him responsible. So, I mean, and then obviously Frank's feels personal because you saw in other episodes, he's had those conversations with Jackson. And then Frank's personally recommended Gibbs for the job. So, I mean, he's basically sticking his neck out there, having conversations with Jackson about, Gibbs's well-being and everything. So you kind of see everybody in the team as kind of having, this personal connection with Pedro and what happened. So when they get down to Mexico, they basically find out the club that they were at is heavily, owned by this cartel, which is the cartel Pedro is the head of. The Reynosa cartel. So there's one other person. He called it, the Mexican police called it two-headed monster. So we find out it's headed by Pedro and I think Ortiz. I apologize, I wrote it down here. But they are the 2 leaders. So they did find out that, that's what happens in this club. They found out the scout. What they also found out was there was a police officer in Mexico. We don't know if he was a detective or a police officer. But he has a whole file. And he says, I'm sorry if the papers are worn out. I've been working the case. So a lot of local girls have gone missing. So they're very much aware that the cartel is taking young girls and trafficking them to the highest bidder. He said, but they're getting braver. They're getting more, more ballsy if they're getting tourists, so to speak, because obviously they're not from Mexico, you know what I mean, because they were driving over to Mexico to celebrate. So, they were like, yeah, now that you're involved, I have files on all the local girls that have gone missing. So you could tell, this was personal for him because he lived in that town. He lived in Tijuana, and he's seeing, these girls go missing, knowing that the cartel has them. So, it was nice to kind of see he was one of the good guys, because when you have an area like that, I mean, you've seen it. We know it. This is 2024. We know police corruption. We know, there's dirty cops, and especially when cartel's involved. When I first started watching it, I'm like, is he getting paid by the cartel to throw them off or what? Because then you see their hotel get shot up. And when I say shot up, I mean like 100 rounds. I mean, everything was destroyed in the hotel, and apparently they shot up their car too. So then you're thinking, who tipped them off? Somebody, and they have somebody on payroll, and I'm hoping it's not that. officer that, from the Mexican police that they talked with, because he seemed like a good guy, but somebody tipped him off, shot up their car and their hotel. Franks finally gets there. You see at the beginning, Mary Jo, love Mary Jo. She's kind of the secretary, but at the same time, she kind of runs things, right? She kind of keeps everybody in line, everybody in check. And she tells Franks, Tish called, the painter's there. Do you want him to start with the kitchen or the bathroom? And Frank's almost like freaks out. What do you mean the painter's there? He's not supposed to be there till Tuesday. I gotta go. Is Dominguez here? Yeah, well, Dominguez is in charge. So, and he rushes home. So you're kind of thinking like, what's going on? Why is he rushing home? And I kind of had my suspicions. And I was correct. We heard in the last previous episodes a little bit of background on Franks and Tish, right? We found the horrible thing that happened to Tish, that she was raped in a parking lot and the man was never found. And Franks is kind of making his mission to find it. And Tish is like, look, it's been years. I need to move on. You got to stop hunting them. So that was heartbreaking to hear, because anytime you hear anybody has been a victim of sexual abuse, it's heartbreaking. And Franks wants to protect her. So he, like, when I heard that, I was like, okay, he doesn't want Tish to be alone. And it's true. He came home and he's like, look, I don't want you to be alone with this painter. And he's like, he's a 60-year-old man. I'm sure he's fine. But he decides to take the day off anyways. Layla's in charge. And then, of course, Franks goes to the hotel once he finds out the cartel's involved with this missing lady, and hears the story about the drunk sailor and the missing girl, or woman, I should say. So he goes down and he shows up after it's been shot up. So he's obviously livid, like, my people are in danger. So, they're still looking for the missing girl, Dana, and they put out kind of a bolo on the scout, they called her. Basically, she is somebody in the cartel who gives them new girls. So Amelia, saw them, said, hey, come to this club, and basically brought them to the cartel. And they find the camera, they find the photos, they find this woman. And Dominguez goes in and talks to her because she knows Spanish and she's able to talk to her. She definitely looks frightened. And she shows her the picture of Dane and she says, yeah, I lure them to the club, basically. And then Layla shows her another picture of a young woman. And she's like, that's you. They abducted you. You were working for them, and now they've recruited you to bring in other girls. So you don't find out that she's like a bad person. I mean, she has been with the cartel. They've basically, trafficked her and have kept her and had her bring in new people. So, you kind of got to see everybody's story. She does give you some good information, though. She basically tells them, they're being held at a gas station. They hold the girls there for a while until they get enough to transport. And basically, it's human trafficking. They're selling the girls out to the highest bidder. So whatever the bidder wants to do with them, that's what's so terrible. I mean, treats them like a piece of meat. It's just awful. In this case, I'm glad the cartel got a little bold and went outside the locals, because this local officer in Mexico has a file on all the missing girls. And, until NIS got involved because of the missing sailor, did they actually find all the girls? So, they did go to the gas station. They found all the girls. They're interviewing the guys, the cartel guys that they took down. One of them isn't saying anything. Typical cartel, they're not going to snitch. And one guy was like, and Layla's like, hey, do you recognize Pedro? Like, where is he? He is your boss. And one guy confesses. He says, look, Pedro's been dead for 6 months, got killed by a sniper. We haven't told anybody. The cartel covered it up because they don't want the cartel to look weak, that their head, one of their head honchos got killed. So once Layla hears that, she walks back out of the interrogation room, and you have Gibbs and Franks. And she says that to them, like, look, he says that Pedro's been dead for 6 months, killed by a sniper. And Gibbs doesn't say anything. Franks doesn't say anything. There's just like silence. And Layla just looks at both of them like, yeah, you both knew. Like, I mean, it was almost like understood, like, okay, You know what I mean? Like, and she kind of gets, you could tell she's like, is this new information to you guys? And like, no expression on either one of their faces. And then the last scene from that case is Layla, Franks, and Gibbs all in the car, and Layla's in the back seat, and there's just like silence. Like you could still tell she's a little peeved, like, you know, kind of like being the last one to know a secret, like, hey, you guys have kept this from me, basically. So she gets a little frustrated, and then the very last scene is a flashback to 6 months ago. So this episode kind of bookended on those flashbacks. First scene in the movie was a flashback that I mentioned with Gibbs from 6 months ago, getting really frustrated, not knowing where Pedro was, and then you see the current case. Now the flashback goes right back to the very beginning. He's still frustrated, but he's eating, and then he sees something. He sees something in a clue. He sees part of a license plate. The alarm goes off, boom, light bulb, like he knows where to find Pedro. He's in a cast from his knee covering his entire foot, his entire leg. You see him cut off his cast, like in pain. He's using scissors, a knife. He's just cutting the cast right off. And then you see him on his little sniper on the hill in his sniper nester. And you see Pedro come out of the church in the car that he identified and drive kind of up the road. And he kills him, and that's the end of the episode. So I like the way they bookend this. You see the very beginning, him frustrated, and then you have an entire case for 55 minutes, and then you see basically the second part of that scene. That scene from the beginning of the episode basically started and ended in the episode, and then they just put a case in the middle about Pedro. So preview for the next week is interesting too, because Layla basically lays into both of them. And she basically says, I don't want to work here. I don't trust either one of you. So kind of what I was telling you before, when she comes back in from that interview room and she looks at both of them, you know, basically when people say people died or, you know, especially with cartels, you don't know if they're lying. Like the one guy refused to snitch on anything. He was just like, I don't know where they are. And this one guy was like, Pedro, he's been dead for 6 months, but the cartel covered it up. They don't want to seem weak. So then, you know, Layla doesn't know to believe him or not. But when she walks in and says that to Franks and Gibbs, seeing that they had like no expression, that's when Layla was like, okay, this guy's telling the truth, and you both already knew that. So I feel like that kind of steered anger in her, and it looks like you're going to see that anger next week. So we're going to see a little bit of drama there. But all in all, I thought this was a great episode. We knew he killed Pedro. If you're a fan of NCIS regular, 22 seasons, I'm sure you are, then you kind of know that. We've seen a flashback of Gibbs on the hill shooting Pedro, but that's all you see. So somewhere in those 22 seasons of NCIS, you know, if you're a fan or if you remember, they do show that. They show Gibbs looking through the sniper rifle and killing Pedro. And you just see a couple minutes before that happens in this episode. So all in all, a great episode. You learned, like I said, you learned a little bit about Layla. We learned how Randy felt kind of guilty about Pedro killing Gibbs' family, and we kind of see that Layla, you know, is taking it personally as being an agent in the agency that allowed that to happen, so to speak, in her case. You know, anytime you lose anybody, same thing with doctors. If you lose somebody on the operating table, I mean, it's personal. So you see that Layla took it personal too, and you, like I said, you see that softer side of Franks. He ran home. Because he just didn't want Tish to be alone with the man because he knew that trauma she went through. So you kind of see that softer side. And then when he sees, like, Trish is like, he's a 60-year-old man. He still took the day off. He still wanted to spend time with her. Then once he found out about Pedro, Tish was like, go, he's fine. You know, and then Tish, being the sweet girl, sweet lady she is, or the sweet woman, I should say, she calls Mary Jo like, hey, just tell Franks when he checks in, the painter's done and gone. You know what I mean? And that was just kind of a way of saying thank you. Like, hey, I just want him to know. I know he's working. I know he's in Mexico, but I want him to know, like, hey, painter's gone. It's all finished. I'm good, you know. So you can kind of see that respect that Franks and Tish have. So I like that. I like to see different layers. You're peeling that onion with Frank's, and I like to see that softer side of them. So all in all, I thought it was a great episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Looking forward to next week where they all kind of blow up and basically everybody knows. It kind of answers that question for us NCIS fans too. You learn in NCIS when you have that episode where Abby finds out that Gibbs killed Pedro, but this was an adult Gibbs. This was 20 years, 30 years later. And you always wonder, did anybody else know? Because when you see the flashback in regular NCIS, nobody's with him, obviously, right? He's killing Pedro on his own. And now that question's being answered. So that's one of those long lost questions, like how does Gibbs get the boat out of his basement? Did anybody else know he killed Pedro back in the day? Well, now we're going to find out. So looking forward to next week. I hope you enjoyed my review of the episode. So until next time, I will see you next week. Bye.